Everywhere in the Soviet Union, there are massive statues, monuments of marble, bronze, and stone, testaments to the war that killed 20 million Russian people, daily reminders. Nowhere is there more evidence of the terror of war than in Stalingrad. The statues and the monuments seem to grow like trees in the city squares, in the forests of graves. High on Mamayev Hill is a pantheon where carved for all time is the name of every Soviet man, woman, and child who died in the Battle of Stalingrad. Some say 750,000. Others put the figure closer to 1 million. Everybody remembers. Nobody counts. This mother knows by heart the exact place where her daughter's name is carved. She can find it blindfolded, cut in stone forever.
Tag und Nacht liegt die starke Wolga-Festung im Hagel der deutschen Bomben. Heer und Luftwaffe haben starke Kräfte zum Sturm auf Stalingrad angesetzt.
By the spring of 1942, less than a year after declaring war on the Soviet Union, Hitler's front lines were 1,000 miles inside Russia. Moscow was threatened. Leningrad fought on. Most of the countries of Europe had either been captured or had aligned themselves with the Third Reich. The Ukraine was gone. The Baltics and Belarusia had fallen to the Nazis. The great battles of Smolensk and Kiev had been lost. In January of 1942, the Nazi High Command had made an attempt to involve Japan in the war against Russia. The Reich, though strong, could use a second front. The Japanese would be the perfect ally. Japan's ambassador Oshima was escorted to the front. There he could see for himself the campaign-hardened Wehrmacht officers. This summer the Soviets will be crushed, Hitler had boasted. It's all but finished. While the ambassador was listening politely, he was thinking of his government's own war against America. Intelligence reports on every side were sketchy, while both the Russians and the Nazis prepared the spring and summer campaign. No one knew for sure where the Nazis would strike next. Stalin thought they would try again for Moscow. He knew the Nazis would not abandon their siege of Leningrad. On April 5th, 1942, the Führer issued his basic battle plans for that year's major campaign of force on the southern front towards Stalingrad and the Caucasus. The Nazis employed 74 of their 217 divisions on the Eastern Front, including 7 armored divisions. These were the 1st and 4th Panzer Armies, a total of about 1 million men, supported by 1,500 airplanes of the 4th Air Force. His secret objective was a breakthrough across the Don and the Volga. He would seize the great oil fields of the Caucasus and Baku, and open the way into Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. The buildup of machinery, artillery, and tanks went on endlessly. And of course, more infantry. Some just in from Germany, seeing the front for the first time. Late that spring, the Soviets struck at Kharkov, intending to retake the Donetsk industrial region. Unfortunately, the Soviets hit the eye of the concentrated German forces, massed for the drive eastward. Three or four Soviet armies were almost destroyed in less than a week. Now the Nazi summer offensive was well underway. The Nazis' main objective was Sevastopol in the Crimea, main base for the Soviet Black Sea Fleet. Sevastopol was a fortress. To reduce it, the Germans brought up special siege guns. In command was von Manstein, one of Hitler's most successful generals. On June 4, 1942, the Soviets abandoned Sevastopol, having withstood a siege of 250 days. Encouraged by their successes at Kharkov, Kerch, and Sevastopol, the Nazis pressed on for Stalingrad and the road to the Caucasus. By mid-June, the Nazis had massed over 250,000 men with 3,000 pieces of artillery and nearly 500 tanks and 1,200 aircraft. Hitler told General von Paulus, commander of the 6th Army, "With your army, you can storm the skies." Against this, the Red Army mustered 160,000 men, just over 2,000 guns and mortars, 400 tanks, and 450 aircraft. The odds were heavily against the Soviets. In the face of the Nazi advance, fighting doggedly, the Red Army steadily withdrew toward Voronezh. The Germans crossed the Don. Then they hit trouble. Soviet High Command had placed 2 infantry armies with powerful tank and air support within the Don Bend. General Halder, chief of the German General Staff, noted in his diary, "The enemy's resistance is building up." 2 weeks later, he noted, "Hard defensive actions on von Paulus's northern flank." During June, the Nazis had lost 130,000 killed and wounded. In July, 160,000. It was the prelude to the Battle of Stalingrad. On July 28th, Stalin had ordered, not one step back. Despite their superiority in numbers and equipment, the Nazis were still more than 60 miles away from Stalingrad. It would take them 2 months to cover the distance. In August, the Nazis lost nearly 260,000 men. In the summer heat of the Don Plain, the Soviets held fast, denying von Paulus the breakthrough he craved. The longer he could be delayed, the more time the Soviets would have to deploy their strategic reserves. And the more armament they would get from the factories of Siberia. The new aircraft, T-34 tanks, guns, Katyusha rocket batteries. Day and night they toiled. And their work rolled westward. Westward to the Volga and the city of Stalingrad. The Germans poured fresh divisions into the conflict. At stake was the fate of the Caucasus. In June, the Nazis had attacked with 38 divisions. By the end of September, they had amassed 80. What had begun as an encounter battle had now developed into a battle of attrition. The irresistible force had met the immovable object. Stalingrad itself had long since been put into a state of readiness. Workers from the great Stalingrad factories joined their militia groups and took up arms. The Regional Party Committee declared, each single one of us must apply himself to the task of defending our beloved town, our homes, and our families. Let us barricade every street, transform every district, every block, every house into an impregnable fortress. Stalingrad's tractor factory had been converted to wartime use. Its tanks went straight to the front. The Germans poured more and more men into the battle, on the ground and from the sky. Von Paulus's advanced units battered their way across the northern suburbs of the city and managed to reach the steep bank of the Volga. Von Paulus assumed that he now had Stalingrad in his grasp. Von Paulus's artillery could range from end to end of the city, and his toehold on the river seemed to indicate that he could command the Soviet supply route. But when the column that had reached the Volga tried to expand its perimeter, the Red Army beat it back. What von Paulus could not know was that the Soviets had turned Stalingrad into one enormous fortress. Confident, von Paulus called in the Luftwaffe to deliver the coup de grace. It was the heaviest strike the Nazi Air Force had made since the first day of the war in Operation Barbarossa. Every bomber that could fly was in the air above the city. They flew a total of over 2,000 sorties. It was a pure terror raid, of the kind the Nazis had patented at Rotterdam, Warsaw, and Belgrade. Its intention was to massacre civilians and demonstrate the folly of further resistance. The Luftwaffe's high explosives began to pulverize the city, giving the coming battle its best-known characteristic. Stalingrad would be a battle fought in a world of rubble. Long after the bombers had left, the flames still crackled. The terror raid had realized one of its objectives. It had killed the innocent, many of them, and wounded more. But the raid's other purpose, the breaking of Stalingrad's will to fight, had utterly failed. Sadly, the citizens salvaged what was left to them and left their homes. From now on, the streets of Stalingrad would be the province of the soldiers. The Luftwaffe's attacks continued, but with less weight against growing opposition. From now on, the Nazis were no longer bombing the defenses. The Nazis had 1,200 planes at their disposal. Soviets, fewer than 500. August 29th, the Soviet High Command signaled the importance it attached to Stalingrad. It sent in Marshal Zhukov. Zhukov had never lost a battle. Von Paulus was still extremely powerful. His 6th Army had reserves not yet committed, as well as 5 panzer divisions that had not yet seen any street fighting. Early in September, Hitler told von Paulus, "The vital thing now is to concentrate every available man and capture as quickly as possible the whole of Stalingrad itself and the banks of the Volga." Von Paulus was a man who obeyed orders. On September 13th, the Germans managed to break into the city proper. They were jubilant. Stalingrad seized. Goebbels announced the demise of the city named after Joseph Stalin. And medals were struck for the victors of Stalingrad. In the field, the issue of awards for valor was prodigal. The Wehrmacht was congratulating itself on its extraordinary achievements. They even started to build a new railroad, not realizing that the real Battle of Stalingrad had not begun. Their mood was one of soldiers who had won a great victory. The letters home were exuberant. Today I wrote to Elsa, "We shall soon see each other. All of us feel that the end The battle for Stalingrad continued. The fighting took on a new character. Whereas previously the course of a campaign could be measured in miles, in Stalingrad, progress was measured in yards. In one 3-day period, the center of the city changed hands 5 times. The front line was behind every pile of rubble. kind of warfare that put a premium on individual skills, quick eyesight, steady nerves, the will to fight and kill. It was unlike any other great battle that had ever been fought. In one building, 20 Soviet soldiers of different nationalities fought off all attacks for 58 days. It became known as Pavlov's house. In honor of Sergeant Yakov Pavlov, commander of the group. In 1970, Pavlov told a story to people the age he was when he fought in 1942. Ivan Afanasyev fought shoulder to shoulder with Pavlov. He was blinded in the war, but doctors recently restored his eyesight.
Here's the mill, Tamara. The fighting was particularly hard here. The Nazis repeated their attacks for days, and we had to hold out on this bank of the Volga. Over there, see that structure? They broke through to the Volga. We only had a narrow strip of land here.
There is no... General Chuikov exhorted. Act more ruthlessly with your grenade, your Tommy gun, your dagger, and your spade. Marshal Chuikov.
Я вспоминаю, когда мы стояли на последнем командном пункте 10-15.
Our last command post was within 10 or 15 yards from the water's edge, I recall. It was very hard fighting between our 62nd Army, later the 8th Guards Army, and the Nazis. They had great superiority.
Эта победа именно была потому что за нами стояла Великая Русь и Великая...
Behind our backs was Great Russia and the Great Volga, Mother Volga. That was the ultimate goal of the Nazi attack. And at the same time, it became the grave for many of them.
Mother Volga, a symbol of Russia's will, the river of her people's poetry, and a source of their wealth. Had little direct effect on the battle. The Volga flotilla made some hit-and-run raids on the German positions on the West Bank. It was aggressive enough to attract the attention of the Luftwaffe. Some of the defenders of Stalingrad were Soviet Marines. One German wrote of their fighting qualities. If all the buildings of Stalingrad are defended like this, then none of our soldiers will get back to Germany. Later, Field Marshal Keitel wrote, "Just to engage another division, another battalion, seemed enough to capture the city." But the German General Staff was dreaming. That summer, the German offensive had seemed bound to succeed until Stalingrad. By fall, the savage battle had shown that the German grand offensive was stalled. For nearly 2 months, the situation maps of the German High Command had shown no change. Moscow, November 6, 1942, the 25th anniversary of the October Revolution. Stalin broadcast.
How can we account for the fact that this year the Germans still managed to take the military initiative and enjoy serious tactical success on our front? The matter is that the Germans and their allies accumulated all their available resources to throw them to the Eastern Front and to create on one sector of the front a great superiority. There is no doubt that but for these measures, the Nazis could not have achieved this success on our front.
Of all the Red Army battles, Stalingrad was the one that tested to the utmost the capacity of the individual Soviet soldier. Of all the Red Army battles, Stalingrad was the one that would determine the outcome of the unknown war.